Hi, meteorologist Paul Dorian here on Monday morning, December the 30th. We've been talking for quite a while about a pattern change in early January that will bring much colder weather to the central and eastern U.S. And indeed, all systems are go for that pattern change. It really gets underway the middle of this week with the passage of a cold front that brings some moderately cold air into the U.S. And then a second cold front will follow for the early part of the upcoming weekend. It turns progressively colder during this upcoming weekend. Next week looks particularly interesting with the possibility of snow and ice on more than one occasion, and some extreme cold can feed into this pattern later next week into the middle part of January, and some of that very cold air can make its way all the way down into the deep south, into places like Texas and Florida in coming days. And again, next week especially looks like a particularly interesting time period with the possibility of some of that extreme cold getting into the pattern here. We're going to start off with a map here, and I just put a posting out there at arcfieldweather.com, and we're going to go through the maps on that posting. So if you want some more detail, if you want to see the text that goes along with all of these maps and plots, etc., just go to arcfieldweather.com. Again, we're going to walk through all of these over the next several minutes here. Wanted to start off here with this very interesting map here that shows the European model forecast of snowfall at least 0.1 inches or more. That's not a lot of snow, but the point to make on this particular map is how far south the possibility of some snowfall exists. This goes all the way out to January 11th, and you see non-zero amounts here all the way down. Let me get a little smaller here for that line here. You get non-zero amounts going all the way down into Mexico and even into the southern part of Florida, non-zero with respect to the possibility of some snow accumulation. This is again between now and January 11th. So this is just an indication as to how extreme the cold air will be, and also how far to the south we may experience some very cold conditions, again, all the way down into Texas and Florida, raising the possibility of some snowfall all the way down into the deep south in this upcoming cold wave. Well, we often talk about teleconnection indices, and indeed, these teleconnection indices that I'm pointing out in this particular map certainly suggest strongly that we're headed for a period of cold weather across the central and eastern U.S. We've talked about the North Atlantic oscillation, the Arctic oscillation. The PNA is the Pacific North America Teleconnection Index. And finally, we see here the EPO, the Eastern Pacific Oscillation. And when these trend in this particular fashion, negative for NAO, AO, and EPO, and positive for PNA, that favors the transport of some very cold air from northern Canada into the central and eastern U.S. And indeed, this is what we're going to see over the early and middle part of January. It leads to what we often refer to as high latitude blocking across Canada, and that in turn will help to sustain this cold weather pattern likely well into the month of January, perhaps even longer than that, into February. Again, these particular teleconnection patterns here, negative for NAO, AO, and EPO, and positive for PNA, favorable for the transport of those cold air masses from not only northern Canada, but perhaps even the other side of the pole, the Siberian side of the pole, into the central and eastern U.S. Well, speaking of those teleconnection indices, let's take a look here. These are the plots. And again, all of these plots available right now at arcfieldweather.com on my latest posting that I just put out there a few minutes ago. The PNA, Pacific North America Index, is in positive territory right now, barely positive, but it stays in positive territory. And the time period here extends from January 1st all the way to January 15th. The red represents the forecast. The black represent past observations. So the PNA, it certainly looks like it'll remain in positive territory through the first half of January. We'll now go a little bit lower on down here and take a look at the NAO and the AO. both of these two drop into negative territory over the next few days, if not there already, and it looks like they'll remain in negative territory right to the middle of January. Again, when these indices track in these particular territory, negative for NAO and AO and positive for PNA, that suggests cold air can make its way from northern Canada into the central and eastern U.S. Well, it's not only across the North America continent that I like to take a look for signals about an upcoming pattern or pattern change. I like to take a look at what's going on in the tropics, and we'll take a look at the Madden-Julian oscillation in a moment, and also at the stratosphere. This time of the year, when you have a stratospheric warming event, that certainly can unleash some cold air masses from the high latitudes into the middle latitudes. That includes the U.S., that includes Europe, and indeed we're experiencing right now a stratospheric warming event that will help to extend this cold wave well into the month of January, and again, possibility of it all the way into the month of February. What we're looking at here is a reference to the QBO, or quasi-biennial oscillation, and radiosonde observations that were just launched recently by NASA suggest it is in what we call an easterly phase. And an easterly phase of this particular index, the quasi-biennial oscillation, dictates the winds at the stratospheric level, and it is correlated with the chance of a stratospheric warming event. Let's just say here, and again, you can go to the text here and read some more detail about this, but let's just say an easterly or descending phase is kind of a favorable phase for stratospheric warming. And we'll scroll down a little bit lower here and take a look here at a forecast of 10 millibar. This is way at the top of the atmosphere of temperatures. This is temperatures at the 10 millibar level, way at the top of the atmosphere, again, stratosphere, excuse me, in about a week or so, a week and a half or so, January 7th. And notice the coldest temperatures here, basically we're looking at the stratospheric polar vortex on the North America side of the pole. Here is Canada and the U.S. down here, and these purples represent the coldest air at the top of the atmosphere in about a week and a half or so. And basically what we're looking at is a stretched out polar vortex that will dip all the way down into the northern U.S., and that certainly is a cold signal. It suggests there's a cold air source here that can supply cold air masses well into the month of January, and indeed stratospheric warming events tend to take several weeks to unfold, so this could help to sustain the cold well into January, again, perhaps even into February. All the warming is on the other side of the pole here, but that causes that disruption or movement of the stratospheric polar vortex, in this particular upcoming case, onto the North America side of the North Pole. Well, on the tropical scene, we like to take a look at what we call the Madden-Julian oscillation. This kind of a plot here we've shown often on these video discussions represents the movement of a tropical disturbance into what we call phases, which really represent different locations around the global tropical scene. And in this particular upcoming period, the MJO is forecasted, and it moves in a counterclockwise fashion on this kind of a plot, moves into what we call phase 8 and then phase 1, albeit in a somewhat weakened position here. Over the early part of January. This one here represents the MJO location on January 1st all the way out to the 13th of January, as represented here. And the bottom line here is the MJO moves through phases 8 and 1 over the next couple of weeks into the middle part of January. And those two phases are correlated with colder than normal weather patterns across the central and eastern U.S. based on past observations this time of the year. So this is another signal in the tropical scene that suggests a colder than normal weather pattern upcoming for the central and eastern states. Well, I talked about some possibility of extreme cold in this upcoming cold wave here. This is a pretty amazing forecast map from the ensemble run of the European model for 2-meter temperature anomalies averaged out over a 5-day period from January 8th to January 13th. And again, we've mentioned before that ensemble runs tend to smooth things out with time. So the longer you go out in a forecast, generally the smoother things get. The highs become less high, the lows become less low. So this is very impressive cold air anomalies, or two-meter temperature anomalies, all the way out in that 5-day period from January 8th to January 13th, suggesting a couple of things. First of all, it's going to be extremely cold. Second of all, that cold extends all the way down into Texas, Mexico, and Florida. So this is a very amazing map to see here. You don't often see this kind of a forecast map by an ensemble version of the model, in this particular case, the European model. And this is an average over a 5-day period. So very impressive indeed here for, let's say, the second week of January 8th to January 13th. Now, similarly, this is an average for a 5-day period from that same 5-day period of the 500 millibar height anomalies by, again, the ensemble run of the European model here from that period, January 8th to January 13th. And all systems are go here for a cold and stormy weather pattern for the central and eastern U.S. You have a deep trough centered over the eastern part of the U.S. You have these oranges representing higher heights or higher pressures than normal. This is your high latitude blocking scenario. You have a ridging along the west coast of Canada and the U.S. And all of this, in turn, favors that transport of some cold air all the way from northern Canada, or even the Siberian part of the northern hemisphere, onto the North America side of the hemisphere into the central and eastern U.S. Basically, your negative NAO, your negative AO, your positive PNA, your negative EPO, and all associated with a deep trough over the eastern states. And again, this is that time period from the 8th to the 13th. So again, let me emphasize that next week, really beginning Sunday, which is the 6th, I believe, the 5th of January, extending for the next 7 days or so, looks like a particularly interesting period. That could be a snow and ice event in the Midwest, in the Mid-Atlantic, in the Northeast U.S. Let's say late Sunday night, Monday of next week, still several days away. It's possible that that will then usher in some very, very cold Arctic air on its heels, and there certainly can be another snow threat beyond the early part of next week, let's say the latter part of next week into the following weekend. And boy, any kind of a snow threat in an Arctic air mass can produce a lot of snow, because those snow to rain ratios would be very, very high if indeed you have Arctic air and then a storm to follow. So very, very interesting weather pattern setting up here. Really gets underway midweek, especially this upcoming weekend, and next week again looks particularly interesting. So again, go to arcfieldweather.com for this latest posting, and certainly for the next several days I will be posting updates on this amazing weather pattern that is about to begin here for the central and eastern U.S. And again, some of that air can be extremely cold, and some of that very cold air can penetrate all the way down into the deep south over the next couple of weeks. That's it for now. For arcfieldweather.com, this has been meteorologist Paul Dorian.